The moment my son Ethan and his wife Sophie thought they'd won $25 million in the lottery, they turned on me. "We don't need your help anymore, Dad," Ethan said, his voice sharp as the wind outside our Pennsylvania home. "Pack your things and go." Sophie stood beside him, arms crossed, her eyes avoiding mine like I was a stranger. I stood there, 67 years old, my hands steady from decades fixing pipes, and I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I'd learned long ago that a smile can hold you together when words try to break you. I held up the lottery ticket, its edges soft from my grip, and said, "Ethan, are you sure you read the name on this ticket right?" They leaned in, their faces curious at first, then pale as snow. Let me take you back to that moment. If you're listening, maybe tell me in the comments where you're from or what time it is for you. I'm George Bennett, and this is the story of how I lost my place in my son's house and found something I didn't know I was looking for. It was a cold February evening, the kind where the air bites your knuckles and the sky looks like it's made of dull steel. I was sitting in the living room of the house I'd helped Ethan buy 3 years ago, after I sold my own to give them a start. The coffee table between us held a pile of bills, electric, gas, water, like a deck of cards nobody wanted to play. Sophie slapped one open, a shut-off notice, and slid it toward me. "$400 for electric, Dad," she said, her voice tight. "And groceries don't pay themselves." Ethan didn't look up from his phone. Some game-flashing colors that lit his face but not his eyes. I folded my hands in my lap, counting my breaths the way I used to on long nights in the shop, fixing leaks while the world slept. "My pension covers what it can," I said. "Maybe it's time you two looked for steadier work." Ethan's head snapped up at that, his jaw tight. "You saying I don't try?" he asked, his tone carrying the weight of a man who's already argued with himself and lost. Sophie paced to the kitchen, her footsteps sharp on the linoleum. "Your $100 a month barely keeps the lights on." "Dad," she said, tapping the notice again, her nail clicking like a clock running out of time. I looked at the sagging blinds, the cold seeping through no matter how tight you pulled them. "I worked my whole life," I said, keeping my voice even. "I sold my house for this one. That wasn't pocket change." Sophie spun around, her eyes narrow. "That was years ago, Dad. Things change." She wasn't wrong. The house I'd raised Ethan in smelled of fresh bread and my wife Ellen's lavender soap. This one smelled of burnt coffee and arguments waiting to spark. Ethan stood, his shadow cutting across the lamp's light. "We appreciate it, Dad," he said, but the word landed like a pebble tossed into a dry well. "But appreciation doesn't pay the bills." I tasted the air, found it empty. I paid for groceries, chipped in for utilities, even the internet they used more than I did, but it was never enough. Sophie reached into her purse, pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and pushed it toward me. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with something close to pity. "Go to the corner store on Birch Street. Buy a couple of lottery tickets. Maybe you'll finally do something useful." I took the bill, its edges worn from passing through too many hands. "Thank you," I said, "because at my age you learn to wear gratitude like a coat against the cold." That $10 bill in my hand felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the money, but because of what it carried. Sophie's words, sharp as a winter gust, and Ethan's silence, heavier still. I slipped it into my wallet, next to a faded photo of Ellen, my wife, gone 5 years now. Her smile in that picture was the kind that could warm a room, even one as cold as this house had become. I stood up, my knees creaking from years of crouching under sinks, and grabbed my coat. "I'll be back soon," I said. But neither Ethan nor Sophie looked up. The door clicked shut behind me, and the Pennsylvania cold hit like a slap. If you're still with me, picture this. A small town in February, where the streets are lined with bare trees, and the snow dusts the sidewalks like forgotten ash. I'm George Bennett, 67, a retired plumber who spent 4 decades fixing leaks and unclogging dreams that weren't my own. This house we lived in on Maple Avenue wasn't mine anymore, not really. I'd sold my old place, the one where Ethan learned to ride a bike, where Ellen planted roses that bloomed every June, to help him and Sophie buy this one. Back then, Ethan hugged me, called it a fresh start. 3 years later, that fresh start felt like a ledger they kept, tallying every dollar I didn't have. I walked toward Birch Street, my boots crunching on the icy sidewalk. The corner store wasn't far, but the cold made every step feel like a mile. I thought about Ethan, my only boy. As a kid, he'd sit on the kitchen counter, watching me fix the garbage disposal, asking questions I didn't always have answers for. "Why do pipes break, Dad?" He'd say, his eyes wide. I'd tell him, "Sometimes things just wear out." I didn't know then that it wasn't just pipes that could wear thin. Ethan hadn't worked steadily in years. He'd tried, construction, delivery, even a stint at a warehouse, but nothing stuck. Sophie worked part-time at a salon, but her tips barely covered her nails. My pension, $100 a month, was the glue holding the house together, but it was never enough for them. Every week, there was a new bill, a new complaint. "The water heater's acting up again, Dad," Ethan would say, like it was my fault. "You were a plumber, right? Fix it." I'd crawl under the house, wrench in hand, feeling the years in my back. I didn't mind the work. I minded the way they looked at me, like I was a tool they didn't need anymore. Sophie's voice echoed in my head as I walked. "Do something useful," she'd said. I'd heard worse over the years, but it stung coming from her. She wasn't always like this. When she and Ethan got married, she'd call me Dad, make me coffee, ask about Ellen's recipes. Now her words were clipped, her eyes always somewhere else. I wondered when I'd become the stranger in their house. The corner store's neon sign buzzed as I approached, casting a weak glow on the snow. I pushed open the door, the bell jingling like a memory of better days. Inside it smelled of stale coffee and cardboard. I'd been coming here for years, long before Ethan and Sophie moved in. Back when Ellen was alive, we'd stop by for milk or a newspaper, her hand in mine. Now I was here for a lottery ticket of all things. I didn't play the lottery. Never saw the point. 40 years as a plumber taught me luck wasn't something you could buy for $1. But Sophie's $10 was burning a hole in my pocket, and I figured I'd do what she asked, if only to keep the peace. I stepped up to the counter, where Tommy, the clerk, was restocking cigarettes. He was a good kid, maybe 22, with a grin that reminded me of Ethan before life got complicated. "Hey, Mr. Bennett," Tommy said, pushing his glasses up. "Cold one out there, huh?" "Cold enough to freeze your thoughts," I said, managing a smile. I pulled out the $10. "Sophie sent me for lottery tickets." "2, I guess," Tommy nodded, punching buttons on the machine. "2 tickets Powerball, right? Any special numbers?" I shrugged. "Whatever the machine picks. Doesn't matter." As he printed the tickets, I thought about Ellen again. She'd laugh if she saw me now, buying lottery tickets with Sophie's crumpled bill. "George," she'd say, "you're too practical for this nonsense." Maybe she was right. But something in me, call it instinct, call it stubbornness, made me pause. I reached into my wallet, pulled out $2 of my own, and said, "Tommy, make it 3 tickets. 2 with my name, 1 with Ethan's." Tommy raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. He printed the extra ticket, wrote George Bennett on 2 and Ethan Bennett on the 3rd, and handed them over. I tucked them into the envelope with Ellen's photo, feeling the weight of a choice I didn't fully understand yet. As I walked back into the cold, the tickets felt like more than paper. They were a quiet promise to myself, one I hadn't made in years. I didn't know what the numbers would bring, but I knew one thing. I wasn't just a guest in my own life anymore. The walk back from the corner store felt longer than it should have. The Pennsylvania cold clung to my coat, and the envelope in my pocket holding 3 lottery tickets and Ellen's faded photo, felt like it was carrying a secret I hadn't quite figured out yet. I'm George Bennett, 67 years old, a plumber who spent 4 decades fixing other people's messes. Now, here I was, holding on to something that might just fix mine. Or break it. Hard to say which. If you're still listening, maybe you've got a story of your own about a moment when you made a choice you didn't fully understand. I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're at, or just say you're here. That night, as I stepped back into the house on Maple Avenue, the air inside wasn't much warmer than the street. Ethan was sprawled on the couch, his phone lighting up his face like it was the only thing keeping him awake. Sophie was in the kitchen, the clink of dishes sharp against the hum of the old fridge. "You get the tickets?" she called, not looking up. "Yeah," I said, hanging my coat on the rack by the door. "Got 'em." I didn't mention the 3rd ticket, the one with my name on it. Something told me to keep that to myself, like a pipe you don't tighten until you're sure it won't leak. I sat in the armchair, Ellen's old chair, the one with the frayed armrests she'd always meant to reupholster. The envelope stayed in my pocket, pressed against my chest like a heartbeat. I thought about Tommy, the kid at the corner store. He was all of 22, with a quick laugh and a habit of asking me about the old days, like he was collecting stories for a book he'd never write. "Mr. Bennett," he'd said as he handed me the tickets, "you ever think about what you'd do with $1,000,000? I'd chuckled, told him I'd settle for a good pair of boots and a quiet porch. He'd grinned, but I saw something in his eyes. Maybe he knew what it was like to want more than you could hold. Buying those tickets wasn't about greed. I need you to know that. It was about something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Control, maybe, or a flicker of the man I used to be, the one who built a life for Ellen and Ethan with nothing but a wrench and a stubborn heart. When Sophie handed me that $10, her words dripping with scorn, I could have just done what she asked. Bought 2 tickets, handed them over, and let it go. But standing at that counter, with Tommy's pen scratching my name on 2 of those tickets, I felt a spark. Like I was claiming something back. I'd never played the lottery before. Ellen used to say it was a tax on dreamers, and I agreed. But that night, as I watched Tommy print those tickets, I thought about her. She'd have shaken her head, laughed that soft laugh of hers, and said, "George, you're too practical for this." Maybe so. But practical doesn't mean you stop hoping. I paid $2 from my own wallet for that extra ticket, and when Tommy wrote George Bennett on it, it felt like signing a contract with myself. Back in the house, Sophie finally looked up from the sink. "Well," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Where are they?" I pulled out the single ticket with Ethan's name and slid it across the coffee table. "Here's yours," I said. Ethan glanced at it, then back at his phone. "Great," he muttered, like it was just another chore. Sophie snatched it up, her eyes scanning the numbers. "You better hope these are lucky, Dad," she said, her voice half teasing, half sharp. "We could use a break," I nodded, keeping my face still. "Couldn't we all?" I said. The other 2 tickets stayed in my pocket, tucked safe beside Ellen's photo. I didn't know why I'd bought them, not really. Not yet. But I'd learned something in 40 years of plumbing. Sometimes you don't know a pipe's broken until the water's already rising.
You prepare anyway.
That night, I lay in the guest room, my room now, with its thin mattress and creaky frame, and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels like peace. It was the kind that waits for something to crack. I pulled the envelope from my pocket, unfolded it, and looked at the tickets. 2 with my name, 1 with Ethan's. I traced the numbers with my thumb, not because I thought they'd win, but because they felt like mine. I thought about Ellen again, her voice clear as if she were in the room. "You always find a way, George," she'd say when a job went south or a bill came due. I didn't know if she was right this time, but as I tucked the envelope back into my pocket, I felt a weight lift, just a little. Like I'd turned a valve, let a bit of pressure out. The lottery drawing was tomorrow night. I didn't expect much. but I went to sleep with a thought I hadn't had in years. Maybe, just maybe, I was still in this game. The night of the lottery drawing, the house on Maple Avenue felt like it was holding its breath. I'm George Bennett, 67, a retired plumber who's seen enough leaks to know when something's about to burst. That night it wasn't pipes, it was everything else. If you're still with me, picture a living room lit by the flicker of a TV screen, the kind of cold February evening where the air feels sharp even indoors. Maybe drop a comment later. Tell me where you're listening from, or just let me know you're here. Ethan was slouched on the couch, his phone finally set aside, eyes glued to the local news channel. Sophie paced behind him, her slippers scuffing the worn carpet. The lottery numbers were about to be announced, and the tension in the room was thicker than the frost on the windows. I sat in Ellen's old armchair, the envelope in my pocket pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat. Inside were 3 tickets, 1 with Ethan's name, 2 with mine. I hadn't told them about the extras. Something in me, maybe instinct, maybe stubbornness, kept that quiet. The TV host's voice cut through the silence, cheerful in that fake way that makes your teeth ache. And now, folks, the Powerball numbers for tonight. Sophie stopped pacing, her hands twisting the dish towel she'd been holding all evening. Ethan leaned forward, his jaw tight, like he was waiting for a verdict. I just watched, my hands folded, my breath steady. I'd spent years fixing emergencies in the dead of night, burst pipes, flooded basements. This wasn't one, but it felt close. The numbers rolled out. 1 by 1, 7, 14, 23, 36, 42, and the Powerball, 9. Sophie grabbed the ticket I'd given them, the one with Ethan's name, and read the numbers aloud, her voice rising with each match. 7, 14, 23. By the time she hit the Powerball, she was screaming. We won, Ethan, we won. Ethan jumped up, grabbed her, and they spun around like kids who'd just found a hidden Christmas present. $25 million, Sophie shouted, her eyes wild. We're set for life. I sat there, quiet, watching them dance in the dim light. For a moment, I let myself feel it. Their joy, the kind I hadn't seen in them since Ethan's wedding day. But then Sophie turned to me, her smile fading like a light switching off. Dad, she said, her voice flat now. We need to talk. Ethan nodded, his excitement cooling into something harder. Look, Dad, this changes things, he said, sitting back down. This money, it's our chance to start fresh. No more scraping by, no more bills piling up. He paused, glancing at Sophie, who gave him a sharp nod. We don't need your pension anymore, or you living here. The words landed like a wrench slipping from your hand, heavy and final. I leaned back in the armchair, feeling its familiar creak. You're saying I should go? I asked, keeping my voice even, the way I did when a customer complained about a job well done. Sophie crossed her arms. We'll help you out, Dad. Pay for a motel for a month, maybe. But this house, it's ours now. We need the space. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at the ticket in Sophie's hand, like it was his ticket out of everything, including me. I stood, my knees protesting, and reached into my pocket. The envelope crinkled under my fingers, but I didn't pull it out yet. Ethan, I said, my voice low, you might want to check that ticket again. Make sure you know whose name is on it. Sophie laughed, short and sharp. What are you talking about? It's Ethan's ticket. You bought it for us. She held it up, waving it like a flag. But Ethan frowned, sensing something in my tone. He took the ticket from her, his fingers trembling just enough to notice. He read it, then read it again. His face went pale, like the snow outside had settled into his skin. George Bennett, he whispered, his voice cracking. It says, George Bennett. Sophie snatched it back, her eyes scanning the paper. No, she said, shaking her head. That's not right. You bought this with our money. I pulled the envelope from my pocket, slow and deliberate, and held up my 2 tickets. You gave me $10 for 2 tickets, I said. I gave you one, with Ethan's name. The other two I paid for myself. Guess which one hit the jackpot? The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the world's holding its breath. Sophie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ethan stared at me, his eyes wide like he was seeing me for the first time. "Dad," he started, his voice shaky. "You can't." "We need that money." I shook my head, folding the envelope back into my pocket. "You needed me out, Ethan. You got your wish." I walked to the hall, grabbed my coat and the small suitcase I kept packed for emergencies. Old plumber's habit. Ethan followed, his voice rising. "Dad, wait, we can talk about this. We can split it, right? You don't need all that." I turned at the door, the cold air already seeping through the crack. "You said I was a burden," I said, my words steady but heavy. "I'm not anymore." I stepped out into the night, the snow crunching under my boots. The streetlights cast long shadows, and my breath fogged in the air. I didn't look back. The ticket in my pocket felt like a key, not to a fortune, but to something I'd lost a long time ago. Myself. As I walked down Maple Avenue, the weight of 67 years didn't feel so heavy anymore. I didn't know where I was going, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, I knew I was moving forward. The snow was still falling as I walked away from the house on Maple Avenue, my suitcase bumping against my leg with every step. I'm George Bennett, 67. A retired plumber who just walked away from a $25 million lottery ticket that my son Ethan thought was his. If you're still here with me, imagine a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind where streetlights hum and the cold makes your bones ache. Maybe drop a comment later. Tell me where you're listening from, or just say you're still with me. I could use the company. That night, I didn't know where I was headed, not exactly. The corner store's neon sign was still glowing in the distance, but I wasn't going back there. Not yet. My boots crunched through the snow and my breath hung in the air like a ghost. The envelope in my pocket, the one with the winning ticket and Ellen's photo, felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. For the first time in years, I wasn't just Ethan's dad or Sophie's burden. I was George again. And George had some figuring out to do. I ended up at a motel just off Route 19, a tired little place with a flickering sign that said, "Vacancy," in red letters. The clerk, a woman with gray hair and a smoker's rasp, didn't ask questions when I paid for a week up front. My room smelled of stale cigarettes and damp carpet, but it had a bed, a chair, and a window that looked out on a half-empty parking lot. I set my suitcase down, pulled out the envelope, and laid the ticket on the table. The numbers stared back at me. 7, 14, 23, 36, 42, Powerball 9. I didn't feel like a millionaire. I felt like a man who'd just walked out of his own life. The next morning, I called Elaine Parker, a lawyer I'd met years ago when I helped fix a leak in her office. She was sharp, mid-50s, with a no-nonsense way of talking that reminded me of Ellen when she was balancing our checkbook. "George," she said over the phone, her voice steady, "you're telling me you've got a $25 million ticket, and your son thinks it's his?" I explained everything. The $10 from Sophie, the 3 tickets, the way Ethan and Sophie turned on me. Elaine didn't laugh or gasp. She just said, "Come to my office tomorrow. Bring the ticket. And don't tell anyone else." I spent that day in the motel, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Ellen. She'd always been the one to keep me grounded. When Ethan was born, she'd hold him and say, "George, we're building something bigger than us." I sold our house to give Ethan a start, but somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of what I was building for myself. I pulled out her photo, the one I kept in my wallet. Her smile was soft, like she knew something I didn't. "What do I do now, Ellen?" I whispered. The room didn't answer, but I felt her there, in the quiet. Elaine's office was a small brick building downtown, wedged between a diner and a hardware store. She sat me down, poured me coffee, and got to work. First thing, she said, we verify the ticket. Then we set up a trust to protect it. You don't want this in your name until we're sure it's secure. She asked about Ethan and Sophie, about the house, about everything. I told her the truth. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted a life that felt like mine again. Over the next week, Elaine handled the details, verifying the ticket, setting up accounts, keeping the press at bay. I moved out of the motel and into a small apartment near a public park, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and windows that let in too much cold. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I bought a few things: a sturdy oak table, a kettle that whistled when it boiled, and a second-hand armchair that didn't sag like Ellen's old one. I didn't need a mansion. I needed a place to breathe. The park became my refuge. Every morning I'd walk the gravel path, watching sparrows hop along the benches. One day I met Ruth, a widow who lived in the apartment next to mine. She was 70, with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes and a habit of feeding the birds. "You're new around here," she said, tossing crumbs from a paper bag. "What's your story, George?" I didn't tell her about the ticket, just said I was starting over. She nodded like she understood. "Starting over's not so bad," she said. "You get to pick what stays." Ruth became a friend, the kind you don't plan for. We'd sit on her balcony sometimes, sipping tea, talking about nothing important: the weather, the birds, the way the town's diner made the best pancakes. I started a list, something I hadn't done since Ellen was alive. Things I needed: a good kettle, a warm coat, a life that didn't feel borrowed. Things I wanted: quiet mornings, honest conversations, a chance to be more than someone's burden. Tommy, the kid from the corner store, stopped by one day. He'd heard I'd moved out of Ethan's place, though I hadn't told him about the ticket. "You okay, Mr. Bennett?" he asked, leaning against my doorframe, his glasses fogging up from the cold. I invited him in, poured him coffee. "I'm getting there," I said. He didn't push, just told me about his plans to go to community college, maybe study engineering. "You remind me of my dad," he said, and I felt a pang, thinking of Ethan. Ethan called a few times, left voicemails that started angry and ended desperate. "Dad, we need to talk about this," he'd say. "You can't just take it all." Sophie sent texts, offering apologies that felt more like negotiations. I didn't respond. Elaine had warned me. People change when money's involved, even family. I wasn't ready to face them, not yet. One evening I sat at my oak table, the kettle whistling softly. I pulled out my list and added a new line: "Keep what matters." I thought about Ellen, about the way she'd sit with me after a long day, her hand on mine. I thought about Ethan, the boy who used to ask me why pipes break. I didn't want the money to change me. I wanted it to give me a chance to live on my terms, so I kept building, one small piece at a time. A chair that held my weight, a park where the sparrows knew my face, a neighbor who laughed like she meant it. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was starting to feel like home. The days after I left Ethan's house turned into weeks, and my new apartment started feeling less like a stopgap and more like a place I could call mine. I'm George Bennett, 67, a retired plumber who'd just walked away from a $25 million lottery ticket that my son thought was his. If you're still with me, picture a small Pennsylvania town in late winter, where the snow's melting into slush and the air carries a hint of spring. Maybe leave a comment later. Tell me where you're at, or just say you're still here. It means more than you know. My life was settling into a quiet rhythm. Morning walks in the park, tea with my neighbor Ruth, a kettle that whistled like it was singing me awake. But Ethan and Sophie weren't done with me, not by a long shot. One morning, as I was scribbling on my list, things like buy a new lamp and check the library's book club, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from Ethan, his voice tight like he was holding back a storm. "Dad, we're not letting this go. That ticket was ours. You'll hear from our lawyer." I set the phone down, my hand steady from years of threading pipes in tight spaces. I wasn't surprised. Money does things to people, even the ones you raised. I called Elaine Parker, my lawyer, right away. She didn't miss a beat. "Let them try, George," she said, her voice crisp as the February air. "You've got the ticket, the receipt, and a witness. They don't have a leg to stand on." That witness was Tommy, the kid from the corner store, who'd written my name on those 2 extra tickets I'd bought with my own $2. Elaine had already collected his statement, along with the receipt I'd kept in my wallet, tucked next to Ellen's photo. "Meet me at my office tomorrow," she said. "We'll prepare." The lawsuit came fast, like a pipe bursting when you least expect it. Ethan and Sophie hired a lawyer, a slick guy in a suit who probably charged more per hour than I'd made in a week as a plumber. They claimed the ticket was family property, arguing that since Sophie gave me the $10, the winnings should be split. I sat in Elaine's office listening to her break it down. "It's nonsense," she said, pushing her glasses up. "You paid for the winning ticket with your money, and Tommy's testimony confirms it." They're grasping at straws. The court date was set for a Tuesday, and I'll be honest. It felt strange, sitting in a courtroom across from my own son. The room smelled of polished wood and old coffee, and the judge, a woman with gray hair and a no-nonsense stare, looked like she'd heard every story twice. Ethan sat with Sophie, his face pale, his hands fidgeting with a pen. Sophie kept her eyes down, like she was counting the tiles on the floor. I didn't want to be there, but I wasn't about to let them take what was mine. Not this time. Elaine was a force, laying out the facts like a blueprint. She presented the receipt, the tickets, and Tommy's statement. Tommy took the stand, his glasses slipping as he spoke. "Mr. Bennett asked for 3 tickets, he said, his voice clear. He paid $10 for 2, and $2 from his own wallet for the 3rd. I wrote his name on 2, Ethan's on 1, just like he asked." The judge nodded, her pen scratching notes. Ethan's lawyer tried to spin it, saying I'd misled them, but it fell flat. The judge wasn't buying it. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. "I've given everything to my son," I said, my voice steady. "My house, my savings, my time. They called me a burden. I bought that ticket with my money, and I'm keeping it." I looked at Ethan as I said it, hoping he'd meet my eyes. He didn't. The judge ruled in my favor that afternoon. The ticket was mine, all 25 million of it. Elaine clapped me on the shoulder as we left the courthouse. "You did the right thing, George," she said. Not everyone would have stayed so calm. I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. Winning didn't feel like winning when it meant standing against your own blood. That night I sat at my oak table, the kettle whistling softly. I thought about Ellen, how she'd always known when to push and when to let go. I didn't want to cut Ethan out of my life, not completely. He was my son, even if he'd forgotten what that meant. So I called him, not about the money, but about something else. "Ethan," I said when he picked up, "there's a counselor in town, Dr. Harris. I'd like us to talk. Not about the ticket, just about us." He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said, "Okay, Dad, I'll try." His voice was small, like the boy who used to ask me why pipes break. We started meeting at Dr. Harris's office, a small room with too many plants and a clock that ticked too loud. Ethan was guarded at first, his arms crossed, his answers short. But over weeks he started to open up. "I felt like a failure," he admitted one session, his eyes on the floor. "You always had it together, Dad." I thought, if I had the money, I could prove I was enough. I listened, my heart heavy. I hadn't known he carried that weight. Sophie didn't come to the sessions, but Ethan said she was struggling too, embarrassed by how they'd acted. I didn't push. Instead, I suggested we meet outside the counselor's office, just the 2 of us. We started going to a diner on Birch Street, the same one near Elaine's office, where the coffee was strong and the pancakes were as good as Ruth said. We didn't talk about money. I told him about the park, the sparrows, the way Ruth's laugh made me think of Ellen. He told me about his new job, a warehouse gig that wasn't much, but felt like a start one day. I brought him something, a pocket watch Ellen had given me for our 10th anniversary. It was scratched, but it still ticked. "This was your mom's," I said, sliding it across the table. "She'd want you to have it." Ethan held it, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "For everything," I nodded, my throat tight. "We're here now," I said. "That's what matters. I wasn't naive. Money changes things, and trust takes time to rebuild." But sitting in that diner, watching Ethan turn the watch over in his hands, I felt a spark of hope. Not for the millions in my account, but for the boy I'd raised, the one who was still in there somewhere. Spring came to our little Pennsylvania town, softening the edges of winter. The snow was gone, replaced by green buds on the trees and sparrows chattering like they had stories to tell. I'm George Bennett, 67, a retired plumber who walked away from a house that wasn't mine anymore, carrying a $25 million lottery ticket and a chance to start over. If you've stayed with me this far, I'm grateful. Maybe drop a comment when you're done. Tell me where you're listening from, or just leave a word to let me know you were here. It's the little things that count. I'd been in my new home for a few months now, a small house I bought just off the park where I took my morning walks. It wasn't fancy, just a single story with a front porch, a kitchen that smelled of coffee, and windows that caught the sunrise. I didn't need more than that. After years of fixing other people's pipes, I'd learned that a home isn't about the size of the walls. It's about what you feel when you step inside. This place felt like mine. I'd settled into a routine that fit me like an old pair of boots. Mornings, I'd walk the gravel path in the park, watching the sparrows hop from bench to bench. Ruth, my neighbor, would sometimes join me, her paper bag of breadcrumbs crinkling as we talked about nothing much. The weather, the way the diner's pancakes were better on Sundays, the books we'd borrowed from the library. I'd joined the library's book club, a small group of folks my age who argued about Steinbeck and sipped weak coffee. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. More than enough. Ethan and I kept meeting at the diner on Birch Street once a week, like a ritual we were both learning to trust. We didn't talk about the money, not anymore. I'd set up a trust with Elaine's help, and the millions were tucked away, safe from prying hands. Instead, we talked about his job at the warehouse, how he was saving for a used car, how Sophie was taking night classes to become a hairdresser. One day, he brought up a memory, him and me fishing at the lake when he was 10, the way I'd laughed when he hooked his own hat instead of a fish. "I miss that," he said, his voice soft, holding the pocket watch I'd given him. I nodded, my throat tight. "Me too. We weren't fixed, not completely. Trust is like a pipe you solder back together. It holds, but you check it now and then to be sure." Still, those diner meetings felt like a bridge, one we were building one coffee at a time. Sophie came once, her eyes nervous but softer than before. She apologized, not with words, but with the way she listened when I talked about Ellen. I didn't push her. Some things take time. I kept in touch with Tommy, too, the kid from the corner store. He'd stop by sometimes, bringing a bag of donuts or just his stories about community college. "You're doing all right, Mr. Bennett," he'd say, grinning as he leaned against my porch railing. I'd shrug, pour him a cup of coffee, and tell him about the sparrows or the book I was reading. He reminded me of Ethan at that age, full of plans, not sure where they'd lead. One afternoon I sat down with Elaine and set up a small fund for the town. Nothing big, just enough to fix the library's chairs, patch the park's benches, maybe buy some new books for the kids who came after school. I didn't want my name on it. "Let it be anonymous," I told her. She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "You're a rare one, George," she said. I didn't feel rare. I felt like a man who'd spent 40 years fixing things. And now I was fixing something for myself. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on my porch with a mug of tea. the kettle's whistle still echoing in my head. The sparrows were settling in the trees, their chatter fading into the dusk. I pulled out my list, the one I'd started in the motel all those months ago. It wasn't long, just a few lines now. A sturdy table, a warm coat, a life that felt like mine. I added one more. Things I keep: family, pride, peace. I thought about Ellen, her smile in that faded photo, the way she'd say, "George, you always find a way." She was right. I'd found a way, not with the millions in my account, but with the small things. A porch that held me, a neighbor who laughed, a son who was learning to see me again. The money hadn't changed me. It just gave me room to choose what mattered. There's a lesson in all this, one I wish I'd learned sooner. Life doesn't owe you anything. Not fairness, not loyalty, not even love. But you owe yourself something. You owe yourself the courage to stand up, to walk away from what breaks you, and to build something new, even if it's just a porch and a mug of tea. Money can buy a house, but only you can make it a home. And home, I've learned, is where you keep what matters: your pride, your peace, the people who see you, really see you. So I sat there watching a sparrow land on the fence I'd fixed last week. It tilted its head, like it knew something I didn't, and I smiled. Ellen would have liked that sparrow. She would have liked this life too. And for the first time in a long time, I liked it myself. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're at, what time it is, or just say you were here. Because in the end, it's the little things, like a sparrow, a fence, a story shared, that make a life worth living.